All right. Hello, everybody. Dr. Rick Wallace here with Dr. Michael Blanchard, and together we are the Teachers, and we have Dr. Clete Ladd, who works in an area that I'm immensely passionate about. So this is going to be exciting for me to have him expound on what he's done, what he's discovered, what he's been working on for decades. He's also a good friend and associate and colleague of Dr. Blanchard. So they've known each other for years. And so I didn't tell Dr. Blanchard this, but he's going to lead this conversation. And you guys will probably love it because, Doc, you should have saw some of the comments that came in from last week, because you were even more subdued and quiet last week than normal. And so it was little smart little comments like, don't talk so much, Dr. Blanchard, blah, 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 and of course, so we're going to put you in the position.
Well, Doc, I'm a man of few words, man. And Dr. Clete knows this. I'm not a big talker. I try to, mince my words and everything and only speak to areas that I have content knowledge in. So if it's something that I don't have content knowledge in, I'm going to defer to those that do. I'm not just going to talk to be talking.
So you didn't have a whole lot of knowledge in doulaing, huh?
No, I don't have a whole lot of knowledge. We had a doula on last week, Dr. Clete.
And so yeah, but they were like, man, Dr. Blanchard talks too much. Oh my God, don't talk so much, Doctor. And I said, okay. So
the idea is to have the guests speak, right? They know what you think. They know primarily what I think because some of them follow me on Facebook. But I'm not a big talker, and those that know me know that, and you know that too, Doc. So I know they're probably saying that you're talking too much, right?
But that's their way of saying shut up, Dr. Rick.
Right.
We're not saying it, hey.
Just put it out there that Dr. Wallace is not talking too much. Dr. Blanchard doesn't talk that much. That's the only thing. So.
Right. So look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the one topic we have for our rapid fire session at the beginning of the show. We're going to talk about it real quick, and then we're going to allow you to introduce Dr. Ladd and talk. We're going to get to talking about what's going on, and I'm excited about it because it's right where I've been for so much of my academic career and cultural and community career. So this past week we found out that a promising young athlete in the NFL, Henry Ruggs III, was involved in a tragic accident in which he ran into someone and their car burst into flames and they died in the car along with their pet. And he was doing 156 miles an hour and his blood alcohol level was twice the legal limit. And I framed my entire conversation around a couple of points. We need to start preparing our kids to be in environments and situations that they haven't been in. You're asking a 22-year-old to go into a situation in which he pretty much has limited exposure because he's in Sin City, where I can imagine that a bunch of stuff that even as an athlete he wouldn't get away with in other cities, they're letting him slide with, number one, because they just got the team. Everybody's happy that they're there. He's a star on the team and blah, blah, blah. So preparation. Obviously, first and foremost, my heart goes out to the victim and her family. That's where it has to start at. Somebody lost their life because of a decision. And that's where it has to start. But also, my point was simple, and then I'm going to turn it over to you, Doc, and then Dr. Ladd and Ray. My point was he absolutely has to meet and deal with the consequences of his actions. I think one of the biggest problems we do for kids who we see as special or gifted or some kind of way going to do something is we relieve them of consequences their whole life. And so they never have to face them. And so then they end up with massive consequences that can literally totally shift and change their entire lives. So first and foremost, you got to answer, you got to deal with the consequences. There's no escaping. There's no, okay, what about? No. And people start saying his life was over. No, his football career is probably over. because he's just a PR nightmare. And so even if he ends up not getting time, I don't see the NFL dealing with him anytime soon, if at all, because this, and then there's film. So, you know how the NFL is. It was all good with Ray Rice until the film hit. And then all of a sudden, hey, we can't deal with you. You're out of the league. Well, they've already cut him off the team, and I'm pretty sure he's going to be out of the league. My thing is on the redemption side of things. I think that you hold him accountable, but at some point in time, if the worst happens and he ends up with 20 years from now, if he has to do day for day, which he probably won't, he's going to emerge back into society. How he emerges in society is going to depend on how we as his people treated him, how we dealt with him. And the crazy thing is, and I'll say this and I'll give it to you, Doc. Probably the most anchored statement I've heard from the public came from somebody that I was having issue with it just a couple of weeks ago about how they were dealing with the Gruden thing, but it was Derek Carr. Derek Carr says, right now I can tell you he's going through a lot to what has happened, and the fact that he's taking a life, he's going through a lot. What he needs right now is to be loved. He says, and if nobody else will do it, I'll do it. And he said he's not even my teammate anymore, but he's a good kid who made a horrible choice, and he shouldn't be thrown away. Now, you frame everything around that. My thing is, again, I'm not arguing that he shouldn't get consequences. I'm not saying how much he should get, because if it was my child, I have to see it from that perspective. But I also have to sit up and say, like, if we're going to throw our children away for making poor decisions at 22, we won't have many after long. I probably wouldn't be here. Right. So the thing is, number one is we need to prepare them better. And then we need to also understand that they're going to make choices and that aren't. And I don't care how well you raise them. You put them in environments they haven't been in before, you can't dictate or predict what decisions and choices they'll make. Now, Doc, it's you.
I guess I'm just wondering where the support was for this young man. Like you said, some of these guys, both in NBA and NFL, are entering the league at 18, sometimes 19, 20 years old. I know all of us are remember Dr. Harry Edwards, this Black sociologist that at one time he was contracted to the NFL and did have rites of passage programs for the NFL where the young men were mentored and had mentors with them and were able to teach them how to be a professional and how to avoid the pitfalls that come with all the money and all the women and all the glam and all of that. And so I guess I'm just wondering where that safety net was and where that program was for that young man.
Dr. Ladd?
Yeah, well, first, I would use it as a teachable moment for future Black boys and Black athletes, professional athletes, because too often when we talk about rites of passage, we tend to use alcohol, how much alcohol we can drink and handle as an indication of our manhood, and that's not correct, and so that's one thing that I think of in terms of support, because I believe that he can have a message for Brother Ruggs can have a message that he can deliver himself to young Black boys, to all boys, and especially the athletes. Give you an example. About in 1985, we played a basketball game. We were city employees, and we had almost a semi-professional basketball league. And we had a young man. I won't mention his name, but we won this championship at Market Square Arena. We played before the Pacers in Atlanta, and this guy from New York Knicks came out and gave his card to one of our teammates and said, "Hey, man, you had a great game, bro. We want you to come to our summer camp." And this brother did, and what he he took the card, and then he said, "Man, I gotta get some money to go." And so we were thinking, well, we'll loan him some bucks or something like that if that's necessary, But he went out and made a drug deal, and then beat the other guy with a hammer and killed him. See, one decision, one moment totally affected this guy's life, the victims' lives, our lives, you know. And I think that a lot of times that's one thing that we don't teach our boys is how important that one moment or one decision can be, and the impact that it can have on their lives. And then I think about forgiveness. You know, we've got to forgive Brother Ruggs, and we've got to help him. You know, let him know the community supports him and his recovery. And you know, I don't want to say rehabilitation, because I don't believe that there is habilitation for us. But I think that we've got to wrap our arms around him and let him know, regardless of when he gets out, whatever time he does, you know, but that he can give back even while he's in the system.
I agree 100%. And I think that was pretty much my closing thing is I think that that's where his redemption comes from, is being able to take his experience and change the lives of other people, and be an inspiration and a word of wisdom, and a cautionary tale. And, you know, that's the whole thing. And someone was saying that they don't know about redemption. My thing is, if you're not going to allow a person a chance to redeem themselves, you might as well just put them away forever. Because you're bringing them back into a world where they got to have a place, or nothing makes sense to them, and you still got a problem, because the moment life doesn't make sense to me, there's no value to it. And if I don't value life, there's all kind of problems that come out of that. And so I agree. I think that everybody made a valid point. And I think that we can use what Dr. Ladd talked about to segue into his work in the importance of preparing young Black males, and how it ties into the school to prison pipeline and so much more. And so, Dr. Blanchard, I'm going to turn it over to you. You guys can take it from there, and I'll get in where I fit in.
Okay, yeah. So I wanted to bring Dr. Ladd on to talk about school to prison pipeline. He's, like I said, he's been working in the area for over 30 years in Indianapolis, specifically with Indianapolis Public Schools, his own rites of passage programs, and as an author. I'm sure we've all seen in the past 25, 30 years the increase of police presence in schools with school resource officers. We've seen a decrease in Black teachers and Black administrators. We've seen an increase in discipline, where we're funneling Black students into correctional institutions and programs. So I just wanted to bring him on to discuss that. Dr. Ladd, could you introduce yourself a little bit, and then talk about some of the work that you're doing in with the school to prison pipeline, and specifically in that talk that you just had, the wake up everybody, let's educate rather than incarcerate, with former Judge Jeffrey Gaither, and I believe it was a young lady by the name of Dr. Lucretia Brown, that was a former superintendent or current superintendent.
Yeah, thank you. Currently, I'm working with the Indiana Council on Educating Students of Color, and we're focusing on after-school activities to teach them about our heritage and our history. So we're not starting with slavery. We're going all the way back to ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, and we're bringing them forward, you know, to let them know that Black lives have always mattered. This isn't nothing new. I think the Black Lives Matter movement kind of exploded on the scene, but like I said, Black lives have always mattered. And we have been leaders in the world development, socialization, communities, democracy forever, you know, since the beginning of time. But what we did is we looked at some things about the school to prison pipeline, and I was really blown away that, especially by Dr. Lucretia Brown and Judge Jeffrey Gaither, because they had they came from two different professions. You know, one is educator and one from the Justice Department. And what they shared with me was just amazing when they talk about the school to prison pipeline. For example, Dr. Brown and then also Dr. Daniels, they shared with me this preschool to prison pipeline, that they say that this is preordained, pre-planned, and that we need to be careful with what's going on in preschool, because 3.6, let me get this correct. Black preschool students are 3.6 times more suspended out of school suspension than any other student. Preschool, 3.6 times. That's almost 4 times the amount, and so that starts there. And, they've got this plan to pay for preschool now. The federal government's talking about paying for preschool. And we're saying, we got to have some educational equity. We got to have some evidence that they won't use this as a means to further subjugate, incarcerate, and not educate our Black children. And so that's one thing. The other thing was that Judge Gaither talked about how schools from like 1990 until about now use the juvenile courts as a discipline arm, as opposed rather than handling them problems themselves. For example, with under zero tolerance, the court was getting students who were basically received 3 strikes for walking out of line or talking out of line or yelling. Judge Gaither mentioned a first grader that they wanted to arrest him because he pushed the principal, a first grader, giving him a record already. He was 6 years old. So that that plans the process right there. That starts the process. And then what does that do? What does that do to him? They talk about social emotional learning, SEL. That traumatizes a Black male 6-year-old. Right, and that begins the process. So that's one of the things that we're really focusing on. We want to prevent that. And one thing that we've done since 1982. Do you remember Dr. Ralph Dow? He was director of Wheeler Boys and Girls Club.
Absolutely. Yeah. I remember I was in the police athletic league for many years. So I worked with Ralph a lot. Yeah.
And thank God for the PAL Club too, because they saved me and saved a lot of us.
A lot of people. I spent like 3 years in there. So
that was my because my father passed. I never knew him, and but he passed. And when the first time I saw him was in his coffin, and I didn't know who he was.
Wow. Same here. First time I saw my dad was at his funeral.
Wow. Yeah. And people were saying, "Oh, we're so sorry that you lost your father." I'm like, I said, "Well, who is this N-word?" Because I didn't know him,
Right.
Right. And, but the PAL Club came to my rescue, and wow. They got me involved in sports. I played high school and college basketball, and thank God for them. But when I went to the Army, and in 1977, I was stationed at Fort Irwin, California. And I was a journalist, and I was assigned to go to dig up a human interest story. And I ran into this Mojave Indian, and he told me to come to their vision quest and observe their vision quest, which is their rite of passage. And I was blown away by what I saw and witnessed, because they separate the boys when the moms and the fathers watch for them to start having nocturnal emissions. And then they remove them from the community and they start their transition to manhood. And I, make a long story short, I said, wow, Black boys need this, And so Dr. Ralph Dow was telling him about, he said, let's see if we can't develop something like that. And, over about the course of about 4 years, we did. And we took boys primarily, we were using it as a gang intervention and a gang prevention step to rehabilitate our boys, to help them make the transition to manhood. Because, you talk about mentoring, and one of my earlier mentors, I'll say his name is Big Man. Big Man had a purple Cadillac and used to let me drive his Cadillac. He said, "Clete, take my car to the car wash, clean it up for me." I'm like, "Oh man, I get to drive the purple Cadillac and, gangster lean and all that stuff and pick up girls and stuff." And Bradley Bulldog was a police officer, and he's a PAL Club officer. James Bradley, we used to call him Bulldog. And he said, "Clete, don't you understand that this man is using you? He's letting you drive his car so you can take attention off of him." Police was following the car. I didn't know that. They were following the car, following me, so he could do his business his illegal drug business, you know. And I think this guy looking out for me, you know, he wants me to be successful and all like that. But no, that's not what he was doing. And so the Pal Club officer, Bradley Bulldog, he pulled me to the side and talked to him and said, just pull over one day and see how many people are following you, see the law enforcement following you. I'm like, wow. And I did that. And an officer came out and searched me and searched the car and all that. And he said, whose car is it? And I told him who it was. But, you know, the long story short was that we need proper mentors, you know, to guide our boys into, you know, to make the transition into manhood. And so, you know, the next day, you know, big man said, hey, you know, take my car. I said, no, man, I ain't down with that, you know. And he wanted to fight me. And I was like, you know, you might whoop me, but I'm going to fight you back, bro, because, you know, I ain't no punk, you know. And but he, you know, he didn't. And then the Pal Club officers put me in the Pal Club basketball. And I said, whoa, man, this took off, you know. And so, like I said, you know, when you have the proper mentors and the proper programming, you know, black boys can make a great transition into manhood, you know. And a lot of people don't realize that it was law enforcement officers that did that. I don't know if you remember Bruiser and Nevels.
Yeah, I certainly do.
Man, these guys took us all around the country, you know, and took us on college tours. Dr. Ralph Dow took us on HBCU college tours. And we went to Atlanta. We saw a black mayor, black police chief, you know, black business owners, black presidents. Black university presidents. We visited Tuskegee, Morris Brown. You know, I'm like, wow, because prior to that, I had never been out of the hood.
Wow.
You know, and so you imagine the trauma that, you know, we went to 4 or 5 funerals as teenagers from friends of ours who were killed or overdosed. You know, so this is all we understood and all we learned. But the Pal Club and Dr. Ralph Dow from the Wheeler Boys and Girls Club, that partnership, they exposed us to the world. And I was like, man, this is beautiful, man. We don't have to live this way, you know. And so I put all that into the rite of passage that up under Dr. Dow's guidance. We didn't realize that Ralph Dow had a PhD in education because he was committed to the Boys and Girls Club. You know, but he was also a university professor. We didn't know that. But, you know, he guided me. And so we took over 300 black boys over the years through our male rite of passage, men allied for leadership empowerment. And each one reached one, you know. And so we had mentors, you know, we had a lot of guys that came through the program, became mentors to successive generations and stuff. And we also took about 30 girls through it. We had the women had to design a passage for them. But I can tell you what we did, you know, and what we're still doing, we moved it to the alternative schools, IPS alternative school. See, the original alternative school was about project-based learning and different learning styles. Every student had an individual learning plan, but then IPS kind of followed the national model to make it make it more of a penal-based institution. So a student would, you know, you could beef them up and send them back, or they would be sentenced to alternative school. But that was not the original alternative school plan, you know. And so we took the boys through rites of passage in alternative schools. And a lot of them turned out to be quite popular, well and wealthy, you know. And I think we only had of about 300, 3 that actually went into the criminal justice system.
Mm. Yeah, we definitely need those type of programs. I guess my frustration sometimes is that we're not able to make as large an impact as I would like, because we know it works. I know it works. I've worked in several programs, like you said, the Police Athletic League, Job Corps. I've worked in Job Corps down here in South Florida. That's a very good program. I just wish we could get into the mind frame of creating these type of programs for ourselves and funding them. That way we have more control over them and we can reach more students. You know, it reminds me of my 19-year-old daughter. I remember when she was in middle school, every time I would come and pick her up, I would have to go to the office to sign in. And every time I went in there, man, I'm sure you maybe have had this experience. There were 20 young black boys in there. every time I went in there. And I'm like, what is the principal doing, or what are the teachers doing? And when I investigated further, it's like if everything that a young black boy does, go to the principal's office. Everything that they do, go to the principal's office. So that's a big problem. We've all talked about how the makeup of the teaching force also affects the discipline. You will have, I know in South Bend, where I'm from, we looked at the disciplinary matrix, and you might have young black boys making up 20% of the school's population, but they're making up 69% of the disciplinary action. It doesn't take a mathematician to know something is wrong, and I think a lot of times the teachers are not able to reach them. They're not able to make a connection with them. And anytime they put up any type of resistance, go to the principal.
Yeah, and let me take you back to antebellum and the white woman and the black male dynamic. Now move that forward to the 20th century and 21st century, and you have that white female teacher and that black male student. And imagine that dynamic, because there's still some kind of residual effect from slavery that I feel, and studies say that, from slavery, that impacts the relationship between white female teachers and black male students. And 9 times out of 10, the black male student will be referred to the principal's office. For example, I had a student whose mom left him. She left him and moved to California. He was 16 years old. He stayed in the house by himself, and she paid the bills for about 2 months and told him he was on his own after that. And so this guy had no respect or trust for women. And a teacher, a white female teacher, yelled at him and told him, what he needed to do. He needed to shut up and sit down like that. And he said, F you, B. Oh my God, he called me a B. He said, F you, get to the principal, like that, Well, I was the principal. And so I said, okay, why you tell that? He said, man, because I don't trust women. Women do this, and that, And that was because of his experience with his mom. So I was telling the teacher, I said, his response to you really had nothing to do with school, because he's a young 16-year-old black male trying to figure things out, why his mom left him, And I said, so we bring the school counselor, but I'm going to refer him to a program. I put him in the Boys and Girls Club program, and he lived in Hallville, but we took him to East Side, to Baltimore, and got him in the club there. But then, like I said, we did all that. Then, they wanted me to suspend him. I said, no, we're not suspending him. I'm not putting him in an alternative school program. No, I'm not like that. He's going back to class tomorrow. And he will apologize. He will apologize to his fellow students. He will apologize to the teacher. But we're going to keep him in the classroom so he can learn and grow. And so they went, they went above my head, and the school board said, we agree with Dr. Ladd. The goal is to keep him in school, to keep him learning, and to keep him focused on becoming a productive citizen. And so after that, I've only expelled in 30 years. I've only expelled one student, and that student brought a gun to school. That was it. And I can tell them the objective is to educate them. Not only with the academics, but about life and socialization.
Wow. So many points you hit on that, like I said, I've been so invested in my entire life. And you go back and we start talking about, you mentioned this earlier, it's preschool, they start to criminalize. Well, if you look at the entire system, it's built on alienating young black males from the system itself to create a discomfort at such a high level that it increases the risk that they will not complete school. Now, we know if they don't complete and get that high school diploma, they're 5 times more likely to become incarcerated.
Yeah.
So if you go back, you can sit up and say, okay, I did a position paper on special education referrals of African-American males. And we talked about the prevalence of referring. We have to look at, again, the teaching demographic. close to 60 to 70% of the teaching population are white middle-aged women who have a historical relationship with Black males, as you put it. And yes, there's a heap of empirical data out there that backs this up. This isn't some far pushed out concept or hypothesis. This is literally something that's substantiated and that you can actually study and measure. So then you look at the fact that there's this teacher who already has a view of who this Black kid is. And as early as 5 years old, she's afraid of him. Mm-hmm. Not in some mystical, I made it up because literally she is afraid. She doesn't feel comfortable. In her mindset, he doesn't fit into her authority. So anything he does is a problem. So she's looking for a reason to get him out of her class to bring back her comfort. So the first thing is, can we find a way to put him in an IEP? So what we're going to do is he's either learning disabled, ADHD, oppositionally defiant, something in that way that we can put him in where he's not really fitting into his environment. He's not socializing to a normal environment. Well, first and foremost, if we're really going to talk about normal environment, let's talk about what normal 5-year-old boys are doing regardless of their race. They're not sitting still for 4 and 5 hours listening to you talk. That's not how they learn. How they learn is exploration. How they learn is the challenge. How they learn is the move. Plus, boys are little bitty future men who have a natural, inherent, inbred instinct to protect. So what are they going to? What are you going to catch them doing in the bathroom? Slap boxing. Why? Because it's a natural part of the development of their skills to be able to physically not only protect themselves but protect the women and the children. Yeah, that's natural. So you got to have that as an understanding. And one of the biggest issues were cultural discrepancies and disparities. You can't understand the culture of a Black male coming out of a Black home, dealing with Black issues that you have never experienced and cannot experience because you're white. Even in white poverty, you don't experience what they experience.
That's right.
So you don't have a cultural awareness of what they're going through. So again, then if I can't get him in an IEP, I'll get him on behavioral issues. And now I have seen a 6-year-old kid in cuffs. Mm-hmm. Are you kidding me? The 6-year-old kid, see, and what you don't get is there is the optics of that because the white people who see the 6-year-old in cuffs says, how bad does this kid have to be for them to feel the need to cuff him? He's dangerous at 5. That's a subliminal message.
Yeah.
It's not something being said, but it just goes on. For you to be in cuffs, you had to do something bad as an adult. What in the world could you have possibly done to get in cuffs at 5? So you are really dangerous. So that means if he's dangerous at 5, how dangerous is he at 20? Okay. So then you go back and say, okay, that's criminalizing. But what does it do to the Black people? It normalizes being criminal.
Yeah.
I'm already used to being in cuffs at 5. So then it sets a mindset of who I am in this world, where I belong, what I'm going to do. And so now you start the track of moving them towards what you got to tell me how the Black race as a whole makes up 13.7% of the population, and we make up 40% of the prison population. You got to explain that to me. You know, and you can't tell me that it's because we are naturally and instinctively criminal. So what's going on in all of this? But the rite of passage thing is huge to me. It's something that I've been on because one of the things that lessens the chance of ending up in prison or lessens the chance of committing violence is proper socialization. Yeah. That comes through rite of passage. That's where Black Men League came from, is saying we have to be involved. And like you, Dr. Blanchard, and then I'm going to turn it back over. Like you, my concern is we got the knowledge. Dr. Ladd has been doing for years what I'm doing with Black Men League. The problem is it's so localized that you can see you know it works because primary example, in 30 years of being an administrator, if he's expelled one student, man, I know schools where that's happening once a week.
Yeah.
Okay, because number one is on both ends. We're not socializing these young black boys. And when I say socializing, there's an element that comes with black males that doesn't come with any other group. So when you socialize a black male, you have to racially socialize them because their blackness leads in every area they go into. Even as academics, we know that we're viewed differently solely when we walk in the room, despite the fact that we've got all the credentials, despite the fact we put in the work, despite the fact we've published I don't know how much, we still are viewed differently. So we have to understand as black men how to deal with that. Well, imagine being a black kid in an environment where you have no say-so.
Right. That's why I believe, I'm doing some work with the International Democratic Education Council. And this is what really blew me away. When we talk about this school to prison pipeline, they talk about it being a global issue. Yes. From England to Denmark to Australia, there's this thing of criminalizing, particularly the black males, the young black males, 5, 6, 7 years old, starts then, and this is a global issue. And I was really blown away by some of the data that they showed me in Great Britain, for example, in England. They made about, what was it? I'm gonna look at this up real quick. That black males were 41% of the discipline issues. Now they're not 41% of the population, And then same thing, there's similar statistics in Australia, similar statistics and data in France. Now these people may are primarily of African origin. They're not descendants from slaves, but we all go back to our when Dr. Rick talked about the cultural aspect of being a black male. The thing, we go back to ancient Egypt, to ancient Kemet, and you're talking about kings, queens, emperors who created, we talk about Imhotep and him, building pyramids and designing pyramids and creating math and medicine, and cataloging diseases and cures and stuff like that. And they take that away from us and try to tell us that we're not great, that, we're just above the animal race. And then bring that back forward to today, and so many of these so many of these white women teachers still see us as animals, that need to be corralled, contained, detained. A friend of mine, S.A. Tenenbaum, he wrote this book called Psycho. You remember Tenenbaum?
Yeah, I know Tenenbaum.
Yeah. And he talks about in Indianapolis, in Indiana, right after emancipation, before emancipation, there was less than 40 black males in prison. But after emancipation, it went up to almost 400 within 2 years.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Dr. Rick, you remember I told you about that out of Dr. Cora Mae Richard Mann's book. She quoted that right after emancipation that the system created the system of prison. There really was no form of prison before emancipation. And
right.
I think it was like within 5 years, because slavery obviously was a type of prison, but the actual prison population, I believe from 1865 to 1870 went from 0 to like 30, made up 36% of black folks in just 5 years. So you can see where it was purposely, the system was purposely developed for that reason.
Yeah. I have a question that popped up, and I think that is prevalent and is dealing with school. I'm going to put it on the screen, and then I'll read it, and then you guys can weigh in on it. It said, do you all know that school now no longer facilitates parent-to-parent meetings? When students have disagreements, they do not include the parents to diffuse. Schools discipline and then call home. And I remember you guys, we all remember that the first element was getting mom involved, but we were talking about a time then where you didn't want the principal to call your mom, so just the idea that somebody's calling home was enough to get you to get your act together. So that was one element of it. But again, we're at a time now where we've moved to the fastest way to criminalization is the number one, load your disciplinary history. So what happens in disciplinary history, and then you guys take over. What happens in disciplinary history is if once I had to tell my sons that what you don't realize is this is going to follow you from elementary to middle school. And what'll happen is eventually you'll get the teachers that sit up and want to review your history, and they know you before you get in the room. They don't know the kid who had some issues, but is a great kid, cool to be around, fun to be around. They just simply see you as a problem. What happens now? They judge everything you do based on that idea of who you are. You don't get the chance that, okay, he's just having a bad day. So that's a problem, is they load you like that. And so based on what this person is saying, and I agree, how does that impact us with no longer having the parents, being pulled into resolve situations before they become technically disciplinary action?
Yeah. Well, for example, I've had students that had fights, and going back to my childhood, my mom was a teacher, and we lived in a neighborhood with, and there were other teachers that lived in our neighborhood at school 37 and school 26, and even at school 73 that we went to. And so when we had a fight, they would call our parents, and our parents would resolve the issues, and both parents would grab both boys and settle the issue, and grab you by the neck and say, this ain't happening again, and it didn't happen again. And so by bringing the parent in, they were able to diffuse the situation, but also help the parents and the boys build relationships. So one of my best friends is a guy that I got in a fight with in the 6th grade. And we've been lifelong friends, because of our parents. Because our parents said, look, we didn't send you to school to fight. We sent you to learn. Now, on the flip side of that, I've been in schools where I was the dean of the school, where they called the parent and said, you need to come and pick your child up because he got into a fight. And she said, well, first off, who was he fighting? And they said, well, they said this thing about we can't divulge this because it's a privacy issue or something like that. They didn't want the parents to meet each other, to talk to each other. And so I said, well, I'll tell you what, this school, I stayed at that school for about 2 weeks. It was early in my career. I was there for about 2 weeks and I left. But so we had I said, let me see, because I think I know one of these kids' parents. And so the parent came and I said, yeah, I did know her. I said, can I talk with you and your son? And so he said, yeah. He said, I asked him, who did he get in a fight with? And he told me. And I said, y'all need to meet each other. Long story short, the two parents met each other and found out they were related, and the boys built great relationships. Getting back to Dr. Dow broke up a fight at the Boys and Girls Club and and zip tied the boys' pants together and made them do police work. They had to police the building. They had to pick up trash around the building, tied to each other. They became friends. We talk about, so the whole thing about this, the reason they don't include parents is because they want to keep us separate. They want to keep us divided. They don't want us to unite and to come together. And that's what you really do is when you have conflicts, you communicate with each other, you talk with each other, and you work your differences out, and you build community. But that's not what that's not what the system wants.
Absolutely not. I think there's more a move to restorative justice too. I know that's happening in Indiana, where you try to solve the root cause of the problem and make all parties accountable rather than just suspending and sending everyone home. But I agree with this person that asked the question. Down here in Florida, as well as Indiana, I've had kids in the public school system for the last 25 years, and we have moved away from including the parents in the solution. And in the name of FERPA, they say, well, privacy, FERPA,
Yeah.
Right. The same person had one more statement, and this definitely falls under the umbrella of what I've spent so much of my time trying to do with rites of passage program as far as socialization. Says, and now here in a Georgia suburb, a disagreement between a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old has ended in an ambushing and gun violence on the 16-year-old, who has now died from a gunshot wound to the head. This has to end. And again, it's a responsibility of the community. And I think that's something where we are, that's what we are really failing in the community, is properly socializing kids, because there's an absence of male modeling. Whereas when we grew up, even in Doc, you and I have talked about this, even in the poor modeling, there was still a sense of certain things and codes. There are no codes in the community. And we talked about this, like when I grew up, there was an understanding: kids athletic, kids smart, kids gonna make it out of here. He's off limits. Not only was I off limits to the little hard heads that might have been looking at me, but they noticed, okay, you're a little hard headed. If we don't watch you, you get in trouble. They would watch me. And if I got caught doing something that they knew wasn't acceptable, the hard heads, the OGs, the cats with records would pull you over and say, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But what it was saying is there is a scope. There is something in the community there's no community now. Everybody's out for themselves. Everybody is looking to do what they do. And so what happens is, when it comes to this violence thing, the one thing I learned when I was studying and researching African-American adolescent and young adult male violence, there are these contributing factors that are always present. At number 5 is urban hassle. Urban hassle is when you grow up in the inner city, you got sirens all times of the night, gunfire all times of the night. You got to wake up and navigate through drug use and gun violence just to get to school. Then you got to deal with it in the school. Then you got to navigate back home, and you got to learn and study. That's urban hassle. That keeps you on an edge. That puts you on an emotional and a psychological edge. Then there is being a witness to violence, which is a desensitization factor. Then there is being a victim of violence, which again is a desensitization factor and a rage builder. Then the two at the top are lack of proper racial socialization, simply socializing a person into where they're at, who they are, giving them a purpose. You're not just here for the sake of existing. You're here for the purpose of actually doing something that changes the world. You have value in this community. But guess what happens when a child looks at themselves in the mirror and sees value? They now see it in the other child that looks like them. And so now they're less likely to take that life because they see themselves in the reflection of that person. So the next part is a little bit more difficult to understand, but the most powerful influence of African-American young adolescent and young adult male violence is the feeling of being disrespected. And if you ask yourself, that doesn't change after you age. The thing that gets under the craw of any man is the feeling of being disrespected. And if you actually do a poll of violent crimes in prison, people who are serving time for violent crimes, the vast majority of those, some kind of way, felt disrespected. Whether you're on my cut, you notice my cut and you own it, or you kicked my shoes and didn't say I'm sorry. I mean, you were messing with my girl. All these things come from what they interpret as being disrespected. And the reason their view of respect is marred, again, there's no male modeling to give them a real idea of what respect is. So they actually, to them, if some of them, if you don't fear them, you're being disrespectful. Yeah. So you got all of those things have to come into play. But to my end, and then you guys take over. To my end, they say, what do you do about it? Again, you have to do what Dr. Ladd is doing and what I'm doing, and I'm pretty sure other guys are doing in pockets. It's got to become a national network of a universal rite of passage that Black boys are walking in the man. Frederick Douglass said it, that it's easier to build strong. It's easier to raise and grow strong children than it is to repair broken men. Once you get them to a certain age and they got this mindset and everything's the enemy, now trying to get that subconscious ideology out of their head is hard.
Yeah, I think what my experience is that we as Black males have an extended adolescence. We don't matriculate into proper adulthood because of racial factors and some things that have been put upon us. We talk about the SEL, social emotional learning, and we did a study here in Indiana, and we found out that by the third grade, that a student has the average Black student has 4 traumatic events, which could be domestic violence, loss of a loved one to violence, or sexual assault. And I was blown away by that. And I don't know what we can do to kind of reverse that situation, other than to come together as a community, to come together and devise programming such as rites of passage, so that we can take students through the stages. So when they reach puberty, we may even have to consider abandoning the idea of the concept of adolescence and just put them into adult in training, because once you get there, this concept of adolescence is European, and then we're stuck. We get stuck there, and that's why we try to prove our manhood by violence. I got a gun. I can drink more than you. I can smoke more than you. I got more women than you. Things that really don't matter, that don't uplift or bring our community forward. And so, that's one of the things that I think about in terms of what can we do, or what can I do, to kind of reverse that. And that's why I've committed to helping boys make that transition. And we're so victimized, and I hate to use that term because, but victimized is since 1619. We talk about the 1619 project, that they keep changing the game on us to keep us victims. And so what can we do to prevent that from occurring in the future? Because we've got so many young men. To give you an idea, I don't know if you remember this, but I was a vice lord. But the vice lord that I was not the tattoo, right? The graffiti vice lord, the drug vice lord. It was victory in ensuring our community's economics. I remember when Chase Bank gave conservative vice lords in Chicago about $150,000 to create a breakfast program. So we tried that here, and it came up with Black Unity Development, and we got lunch programs for summer programs. But then all of a sudden it became a narco economy because, where they introduced narcotics and this drug trade to the vice lords and the disciples, which was called Black Growth and Development, but then became Black Gangster Disciples, And so the things that we were doing in the grassroots to make a positive difference in our communities, they corrupted by bringing drugs into the community. And now look at us.
We have another question. And I think the question was, is there a rite of passage program there in Georgia? And I know that we don't have one, but what I've tried to do, and then you can speak on it. What I've tried to do is anywhere that people are willing to be trained, I'm willing to invest time, in trying to get that done. But my goal is, and has been, in Dr. Blanchard, you can attest to this, for years, it has been to create a network where every city has, and to me, you also can attest to this. It's been Black men lead for me forever, because that was my baby. That's what I did. But this isn't about copywriting and all that other stuff. This is about whoever name on it, whatever sounds the best, merging with people and connecting and making sure it happens is what matters to me. So it's connecting with people who are serious about it and then making it a national unified thing. It's great when you're doing it in pockets, because what you'll do is you'll create these great minds that'll come out of it, that are successful and that'll do things and hopefully impact the world in the future. But if you're talking about actually changing the trajectory of an entire race of people, you've got to have a bigger hit and a bigger reach. and it's got to be done simultaneously.
Yeah.
And so this means that we need a national universal rite of passage where it's being taught the same way. So if I literally break off and move as a parent and take my sons from one city to the next city, there are young men being reared and taught the same principles the same way as he plugs right in.
Yeah.
And he's going to be held accountable right away. And he knows what's expected of him. So there's not this void of like, oh man, I'm in a new place, I'm all alone. And that isolation is another thing that happens. That isolation makes you feel vulnerable. So you start to assert yourself to remove the feeling of feeling weak by overcompensating through hypermasculinity.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of these things need to be in place. So I told the person, as far as I'm concerned, if you can find enough people interested, I'll give you everything I have, and then we can start filling on and building. So that's the way to me that we've got to get it done. But we need to become more deliberate in doing it.
Yeah. You know, let me say this. So when I took it up and Dr. Dow had me doing my research, he called a friend of his who was a rabbi. And I went to visit this rabbi, and he told me about the bar mitzvah. And the bar mitzvah is universal.
That's where I got the idea from. The universal is from bar mitzvahs.
Yep. And that, I mean, you know, the Jewish, they don't care about that even in education, because they will have their own schools. They will teach their own way. They teach their own history, you know, and some of the Native Americans do that. You know, the indigenous people do that as well. And I was really blown away because I talked to 3 rabbis, and one was Hasidic, and the other one was reformist, and they were all on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
They were all on the same page. I'm like, we got it. That's something that we have to do, Dr. Rick. You know, you're right. We've talked to, I've talked with churches about it, and they want to do it in a denominational sense. And I said, no, it can't be that way. And I've talked to some Islamic friends, and they want to do it the same way. You know, well, I'm gonna do it the Shiite way. I'm gonna do it the Sunni way. I'm like, no, man, that's suicide. You know, my grandfather used to tell me about the shotgun approach versus the rifle. The shotgun is all over the place. Mm-hmm. The rifle is
precise.
At one point.
Right, precise. And precision and being deliberate. And one of the things I put down in my journal daily when I'm doing my thing daily is the words precise and deliberate come up constantly, because deliberate is a focus and a concentration on a specific thing with intention. Mm-hmm. It's not being led by something else. It's by establishing an attention that this is what's going to happen. So you be deliberate in your actions, and you be focused in your actions and consistent. And the thing is, that's what I saw with bar mitzvahs, is that it's universal. It's absolutely universal. And it transcends the different sects of Judaism. It is what it is. And I think that's extremely important. So when I start talking to people in the community, whether you are Baptist, whether you are holiness, whether you are Catholic, whatever, the one universal thing you have in common is your blackness. So that's where you start to develop from, is in your blackness, because nobody knows you're Catholic by looking at you. Nobody knows your holiness by looking at you. But the moment you walk in the room, they see your blackness. And if that's what's going to be judged first, that's when you respond first. And that's where you have to be prepared. Nobody's going to care whether you're practicing Islam in any sense when they meet you as a black person. All of that stuff comes out later when people get to know you. They get to get the deeper. What's at the beginning in the forefront? How are we going to confront that? How are we going to deal with each other? How do we recognize each other first? I don't know what faith you practice. I don't care. I see you're a black man with the same interests I have. We can put those other things aside, because the one thing we can't escape is our blackness. And my thing is, we've got to have a responsibility to the next generation of men that says, we're going to prepare you to take this thing further than we did. I think that's one of the biggest failures that we have, is that as black men, we don't experience power on a universal level the way white men do, you know, where it's just going to be passed down to you. You're going to get certain opportunities. You're going to, and unless you're just really trifling, you're going to find yourself in a position where you have more people answering to you than you answer to. That's just the way it's not built that way for us. That's why you have black preachers who are 80-something years old, still in the pulpit, train nobody to follow them, because that's the only power they've ever experienced. And you can see it in every area. So my thing is, I told you this, Doc. I said, by the time I'm 55, man, I don't want to be on the forefronts. I want to have trained men who are younger than me, who have the energy to be. I want to be the voice of reason and wisdom. I want to be the one that these young cats call and pick up the phone. Hey, Doc, man, I'm about to go out and do what do you know, I want to be what we should be at our ages, is starting to move into the elder realm, to where we are the wisdom that these warriors tap into to make sure their heads are on straight. But what we can't do is be so caught up in the attention we get by the space that we've created that we didn't prepare anybody to step into it when we're gone. Because then that creates a vacuum. If you get snatched out of your space and nobody's there to fill it, it's a vacuum. And then anything gets sucked in.
Yeah.
Man, we just not recovering from trying to replace Dr. King and Malcolm. Because nobody was prepared on the next level to just rise up. And what happens also, when you train young men, that every last one of you are a leader. Every last one of you are a warrior. Guess what? There's no head to cut off.
Right.
So assassination no longer works.
That's right. I know a lot of pastors here locally, and my father-in-law as well. They moved into their 80s, and they all passed. And 4 or 5 of the churches closed because they did not pass it down. They did not, they did not set it up for the leadership to continue after they left. And then I looked at some things like some school when we come to education and stuff like that. I had a couple of principals that really helped me. Jethro Nays, he was an older black guy, and he took me on. He took me on to mentor me as a school principal. The state assigned me a mentor, to get my license. The state assigned me a mentor, and I went through the motions with him. But I learned from Jethro Nays, and Jethro Nays he helped design one of the first alternative schools. And so what we learned is particularly us, we learn by doing. We learn by projects, project-based learning. And to give you an example, my uncle went to the 6th grade, but he could repair a car even, and he would tell me, I would say, Uncle Don, my car ain't working, ain't starting. He said, well, turn the key and let me hear it. And he would tell you what's wrong with the car by the sound, And I use that example to talk about VARC analysis, visual, auditory, read, write, kinesthetic, that students have different learning styles and learning strengths. And some students can learn by listening, others can learn by reading and writing, but others have to learn by doing it, And so I had a student that couldn't get the area, this geometry problem. So I told him, I said, well, I need you to come by. I want you to carpet this bathroom for me. I'm not to lay this tile for this bathroom for me. He said, okay. I said, well, I don't know what you got to do. I said, I guess you got to measure it. So he measured. He said, oh, okay. He said, well, it's 8 feet long and it's 4 feet wide, and then this part is 6 feet. I said, well, how much material do you need? He told me what he needed. And I said, okay. I said, now go back to your class, your geometry class, and look at length times width equals area. He picked it up, but he had to have his hands on it, He had to, and I told the teacher, I said, you can write a lesson plan that includes some differentiation so all students can learn, because a lot of students ain't gonna, like Dr. Rick mentioned earlier, they ain't gonna learn but you sitting on the board lecturing.
Right.
And I didn't learn that way,
Right.
I learned by doing, I learned by listening. Like I said, my Uncle Don, he passed in 2019. He was fixing 2019, 2018 Mercedes and BMWs with a 6th grade education. No computer, no diagnostic, just let me hear.
Doc?
Yeah, you all bring up a very good point about education and how important the lineage and culture and lived experiences are of teachers. And you know, I don't know about you, but as I walk through the schools down here in South Florida, there are very few black males in the buildings. I don't know what it's like there in Indiana or in Indianapolis, but in South Bend, when I go back home, I have one daughter that's still there in school, and it's very hard pressed to find a black male teacher. The few black teachers we do have are mostly female, and so we definitely have to increase the number of black teachers and younger teachers. Our teaching force has really aged, and I know you know this, Dr. Clete. And I think that many of them cannot connect with our youth. And so I think that's affecting the type of education they get. They're not tech savvy. So we know with COVID, everything is technology. It's going into technology. I know down here in South Florida where I'm at, you know, most of the teachers were my age, middle age, our age, and they had a real tough time adapting to the technology, which affected the type of education kids get on top of everything else they're dealing with.
But, you know, speaking about relationships, you know, one of the people that I had a great relationship with in school was the black janitor, Mr. Powell, you know, and he was coming to me and said, boy, now you know better than that, you know, and he would just drop a little wisdom on you. And I looked at that. I looked at that when I went to, I go to schools I work for University of Phoenix, and I go do teacher observations and stuff and principal observations and interact with them. And I looked around and I said, Dad, I see, you know, mainly white female teachers. Then I said, well, who's your custodian? I'd like to talk to your custodian. And almost like 70% of the time, the custodian is a black male. And all the students respect him. He can walk in. I seen this one custodian brother. The kids were fighting, and he had the mop. He laid the mop down and went over and separated the kids and said, why are y'all fighting each other? And the kids were like, well, he said so. He did this, and he said that to me. And so the brother said, well, I'm going to say this to you. You're here not to fight. He picked up the mop and walked away. And the kids walked away and went back to learning.
You know what the element is? The simplicity of the element there? Guess who the janitor represents? Grandpa. The one person in the family everybody respects.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, you might not have dad, but grandpa's there, because even if it's mom's dad, he's there. Or, you know, if he was alive when you came along, there's a respect for that person because of what he represents. And when all he has to do is show a genuine concern, and they embrace him. And it's the simplicity, but that tells you what happens when we don't have enough males. And that's something else we had when we were in school. We had the black coaches, the black teachers, and they didn't play. And, you know, and the last thing you want, it never even got back to my parents, because I played football and ran track. I couldn't let it get back to the coaches.
Right.
And so then the way it was, a lot of the coaches taught classes too. So they were in the school classroom. It was a coach a few doors down somewhere. And they knew you was an athlete. Like, you want me to go get coach? No, I'm good. But what happens is that entire element is absent. It's absent in the school. It's absent in the community. And the most, and people don't get this, you take away the deacons and the pastor, and it's absent in the church. The church is roughly about 80% female.
Yeah.
You know, I read something about a guy by the name of, I believe it was Leon Pottles. And it's an older book, but it's called The Church Impotent. And it talks about how masculinely impotent the church is. Take away the leadership, and the most you get is a few guys in the pews. If you take away deacons, administrators, the pulpit, and all of that, you got very little out of that. And the reason is, and here's something we can get on, and then we're gonna go off into because I definitely want you to talk about your lynching project. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets real crazy. He says, because the femininity in men is so accepted in the church that it makes the masculine man uncomfortable. And so he goes off into that. But the bottom line is, not even in the church do you get the manhood modeled the way you think it should be.
Right.
So where are they getting the modeling from?
The hood.
Well, we know where the media, we know where they're getting it from now.
Media and the hood. Yeah.
We got a lot of what do they call it, Doc? They call a lot of moistness on the media.
They done got mad at me because I used that word. Moist. Man, too many moist cats. You know, and like I said, being reared by, I don't even think I mentioned this, Dr. Clete, but I wasn't just, while I didn't have my dad, like I said, first time I saw my dad was at his funeral, but I did have a man in the house my entire life, and it was my great grandfather. And I say, people, when you say your great grandfather, people say, okay, until you say, no, I was reared by my grandmother's parents. Then they wait a minute. Yeah, you know, I was adopted by my great grandparents, so that made me my grandmother's brother.
Wow.
And it made me my mama's uncle. And I wore those badges proudly. I gave them the business. But ultimately, though, that was a different type of manhood coming from someone who was born in 1909 and grew up as a son of a sharecropper. A man who had a second grade education, but talking about could do anything, built his own garage, was a carpenter, changed and did everything. Everything I know about cars, I learned from him. Did everything in the house, plumbing. So, I mean, he could put his hand on things. To me, still, there's something about manhood when you use your hands to do something, whether it's electrical work, whether it's plumbing, whether it's automotive work. There's a fulfillment that comes out of that. That kind of solidifies you. There's a reason why they took that out of school. Number one is it gave you a means of providing for yourself without advanced education. Number two, immediately what he found out is a sense of confidence. I'm at 6th and 7th grade, and I'm pulling the block out of a motor, and that's major, and I can do it. Well, guess what? You start thinking I can do some other stuff too.
Right. That's
a problem for people who literally benefit off of you being at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. But that's that. But so Doc, segue us into what we're going to talk about which I'm really excited to hear about as well, is the lynching project.
Yeah, Dr. Clete, I know a lot of us who are in Indiana and some people around the world remember that picture in Marion, Indiana. I know you know what I'm talking about. And there are two men hanging in that tree in Marion, Indiana. And there's a little girl down there, and there's a guy pointing up in the tree. And for me, I always remember that because I actually went to Indiana Wesleyan University, and growing up in South Bend and living in Indianapolis for 15 years, that picture always jumped out at me because of being from Indiana. So we can segue into what you're doing with the Indiana Remembrance Coalition and the connection that you have with that and one of your ancestors that was actually lynched in Indiana.
Yeah, thank you. So a friend of mine, he's a professor at IU in Bloomington, contacted me and said he was doing this project because he discovered, that there were some lynchings that occurred in Marion County, Hancock County, Hamilton County, Johnson County, and Hendricks County, so central Indiana. And so he said he came across the name of a person by the name of Eli Ladd, and he said, well, let me contact Brother Clete and see if he's related. And so he contacted me, and he told me he showed me the data, the document. It was in a newspaper in Bloomfield, Indiana, which is right outside of Greenfield, Indiana, right outside Marion County. And it said, Eli Ladd was beaten and clubbed to death and shot by a group of whites because he was accused of raping someone. They didn't say who he raped. They didn't say that he raped a white woman or black woman or nothing like that. They just said that he raped. And so the Indiana Remembrance Coalition don't just use the rope lynchings as a definition. So any unjustified killing that is racially biased, is considered a lynching. And so he sent it to me, and I read it, and I said, well, I got this family. We had a family reunion in 1995 that went all the way back to 1835. And I looked in there and read it, and I said, well, Dad, my great grandfather's brother had a grandson named Eli Ladd. And so I went back and traced the family trees a little bit more through my heritage, and found out, well, Dad, this guy is related to us, And so I immediately started sharing this with family members, and people were, the older family members, those who were in the 80s and 90s said, oh yeah, I remember that story. I'm like, they never shared that with us, And I think that there was a fear on their parts for not sharing that with us, So as I did more research and talked with more people at IU and got involved with the project, I found out that there was a lynchings at Riverside Park, Garfield Park, 16th and it was called Northwest at the time, which is now Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard, and then in Hamilton County, and then Hendricks County, and Johnson County. And so the EJI Institute in Selma, they reached out to us and said that they collect the dirt from the places for lynching victims, stuff like that, and they display it. And so we're going to have a memorial service for George Tompkins, who was lynched at Riverside Park. And so we're going to collect the dirt. We're going to have students collect the dirt and label it, and students are going to tell his story. And we also have students doing an art project on lynching, so to kind of help them emotionally, because a lot of people don't, once you start reading it and looking at it, it tends to affect you emotionally. And so we want students to be prepared for it. We want parents to be prepared for it. We want the community to be prepared for it. But we're having the students to lead it. And I was really, we thought we'd have about 3 or 4 students. We talked to them and say, hey, what do you think about this project? And now we've got 22 students, middle school students and high school students, who want to be involved in this project. And they want to create art that explains what they read and what they learned about lynchings in Indianapolis and Central Indiana. And I'm telling you, it's something we're also working on curriculum to add this to the curriculum base for Indiana, because that's missing as well. They only start, when you talk about the history of Black people in Indiana, they start with slavery. And, we're like, hey, we go way back before that. Africa, Kemet, Mali, Mansa Musa, we go all the way back, Nefertiti, we ain't talking about the white Cleopatra, but we go all the way back. We want them to understand that how this stuff began, how this racism began, because race is something that the Human Genome Project, kind of disputed, and they talk about, if you talk about critical race theory, they say that how this developed, this hatred for people of color, and that's what they talk about, the hatred of people of color. And now people are trying to say, oh, we don't hate Black people, but your actions, your history and your actions and the premise of us achieving equity and equality does not exist if you don't teach the truth. Right. So I just wanted to share that with you, and I will definitely keep you updated on the progress and the process of the Indiana Remembrance Coalition projects and the dirt collecting and the student artwork.
Hey, Doc, I have one question. What do the range of dates that you have for the Indiana Remembrance Coalition? You said you're documenting. So what was the first documented lynching that you all know of? And then what is the most recent? that you acknowledge in the coalition?
Well, the coalition starts with 1896 with Eli Ladd. And then it goes through to 1928 because you remember the Klan built Crispus Attucks.
Right.
And Crispus Attucks is right at 10th and 11th at Northwestern. And they wanted to send a message. There was some documents that they say they wanted to send a message, and they lynched a young 16-year-old at student at 16th and Northwestern, like 4 blocks away, 5 blocks away, to send a message, So, but there were other lynchings that occurred between that time, and then everybody knows about the lynching in Marion, and the that history there, and then you see how many kids are. If you look at that photo, you see how many children are there watching that lynching, that witnessed that lynching. That it's like an entertainment event, and so we're trying to help them understand what they did to generations of their own children,
right,
by allowing them to witness that, to further victimize people of color. And
right.
So then when you come to things such as Michael Taylor,
Right.
They're trying to define those as lynchings as well.
Right. That's why I asked the question, because you and I both know from having lived in Indianapolis, we have other questionable deaths of individuals who could possibly be actual lynchings, not in the sense of the traditional way, but through law enforcement and other means as well.
That's why I said they went beyond just the rope, using the rope.
Right. Wow. I mean, that's immensely powerful that's being done. And I think it's important that there are avenues of healing for you, because I think one of the things when we talk about the multi-generational transmission of trauma, one of the things that we have to look at is we're not talking about the progression, the generational progression of a healed people. We're talking about a situation in which we never ever got to a point of healing, and we're consistently experiencing what's known as re-injury. So every time a young kid is killed, unarmed kid is killed by police officers, or in the sense of Ahmaud Arbery, basically a white lynch mob chases him down and shoots him to death, again, a lynching. And you have to understand the concept of lynching and where it comes from. It hit its height after slavery. Why? Because black people stopped being property and therefore lost their value. You don't kill your property because it's your value. So for slaves to get killed, there was something extreme going on. But once slavery ended, it took off. And people talk about, well, if you compare the number of people who were lynched, the confirmed lynchings, to XYZ, and they always use those numbers. Well, you have to understand the concept of lynching. Lynching isn't about decreasing the numbers. Lynching is a form of terror. Lynching is a way you send a message to people that they don't have power, that their lives don't matter, that any moment you can come up without provocation and end it in the most horrific of ways. And then that's why blacks were left hanging during lynches, because it was more emphatic and powerful in controlling those who walked by and saw it than it was with them. They're gone. But what about the kids? And so you got the psychological impact of that. That's a part of the re-injury. You got the helplessness that comes along with that. And the idea of where are we now different from that? And those answers all have to come together. You have to say, where are we? How are we different now than then? They use the rope a lot less. That's about it.
Yeah, Doc, your example reminds me of my dad. My dad passed in 2011. He was 88, but he came from Wilson, Arkansas, all the way to South Bend, Indiana at 14 years of age. And one of the reasons he left Wilson, Arkansas, he told me, because he was, obviously they were into doing farm work or sharecropping. He didn't want that type of lifestyle. But the other reason he told me he left at such a young age was lynching. And he said many times he would be riding on the train, and the train conductor would pull the whistle, and that would be a cue for them to look out the window of the train. And they'd look out the window of the train, and of course they would see black men hanging from trees. And he said, that kind of terrorized him at such a young age, and he didn't want, so much so that he didn't want to live in the South anymore. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Yeah. And the thing about it is we don't know how many lynchings have occurred, because a lot of that was not reported. A lot of those were written off as accidental deaths. Like there was a black man who was killed by a train, run over by a train, but they said that he was killed because he was inebriated. But they found rope marks around his wrists.
Yeah.
And so like I said, we don't have a true accounting, but we're going to try to get as much as we can and evidence as much as we can.
Right. And, I'll close out my part by going back and touching on the part that you mentioned, is the pathology associated with the entire act of lynching and how it was done. And like you say, you're talking about something that these people literally took pictures of and turned into postcards.
Mm-hmm.
And the presence of young children is early. I know I've seen them where the little girl had to be at 5, 6, and sitting right up front, and they're smiling and they're taking pictures and they're cutting pieces out of the charred bodies to take home and put on their mantles. That's a pathology nobody wants to explore outside of the evil of murder. What type of pathology and sickness has to exist where you think it's okay to do it in front of your kids? One. Number two, that you want to keep a souvenir. 3, and that you memorialize it in photographs.
Well, I mean, it almost leaves me speechless, bro.
But nobody wants to talk about that. But we are the ones who are inherently violent.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Ladd, I want to thank you for coming on today, man. We've learned a lot from you here today. And, if you would give everyone your contact information and also provide that for Dr. Wallace to put on the show when we post it. How can people contact you, and how can they get involved with the Indiana Remembrance Coalition, or how can they also assist you with the work that you're doing with the school to prison pipeline?
Yeah, excellent. The best way is email. I have a 30-year-old email address that I get a lot of email.
You too.
Y'all with these AOL. Go ahead. Give it to everybody.
All right. It's clete.ladd@aol.com. clete.ladd@aol.com. And I'll respond to that one. I check that one multiple times a day, because a lot, people that you haven't heard from in years will respond to you or reach out to you, and you don't want to miss any connections. And I really appreciate you, Dr. Rick, Dr. Mike, man, because you guys, I've learned a lot, and I just I'm honored to be able to share my thoughts and experiences with y'all, and love that y'all shared y'all's with me, and I really appreciate that, brothers.
Feeling is mutual.
Absolutely, Dr. Ladd. I'll be in touch, my brother.
All right, my brothers.
All right, everyone. Thank you guys for dropping into another episode of the Teachers. We want to thank Dr. Ladd for giving us so much valuable information and sharing. It's been an awesome day today, and we'll see you next week. We're out.